Schrödinger's speculation of evolution. Hi, my name is Wani and I'm a philosophy student at La Sorbonne. Today we'll be talking about three things from his book Mind and Matter, which is organic selection, what is right about Lamarck's theory, 2, the role of the environment, needs versus foe, the compromise, 3, the transmission, so 1, learning and continued application, 2, when physical and mental becomes one, and 3, evolution through experience and alteration, not simply utility. So if you watched the previous video, I share what Schrödinger has to say about two theories of evolution, that of Darwin and that of Lamarck. But then here we're talking about Schrödinger's speculation of evolution. Honestly, I had to, ask a few people to just make sure that it's not just like my little algorithm bubble, but no one really thought this was interesting enough to have it on the internet. So you maybe heard it first here. Why speculation and why not theory? I think we all know that Schrödinger is a lot more known for quantum physics. So probably these are just his reflections that he didn't test out. I mean, if anyone wants to link me to something that shows that he did, let me know. But these are my speculations of why it is that I probably wouldn't call it a theory. Theories are usually testable predictions. It can be falsified. Look at Popper's refutations, but again, look at Meillassoux' critique on Popper in Après la finitude. I just read this book because I'm preparing it for a book club, but it's a great read, 10 out of 10 recommend. And yeah, open to the revision as new evidence comes to light. I'm throwing this away because I read the critique. So the reason why I call this more of speculation is that it is more based on reasoning, logic, and it's often about things that we cannot test or measure. So just a quick tangent. When I was proposing a project to one of the professors, he asked me simply this sounds really epistemological. Why are you not taking this to an epistemology professor? And I didn't really say anything. And he was just yeah, because I already pitched this. I did a philosophy elevator pitch. And he's just it's because it's speculative. And I was yeah. I had no idea, and I'm still trying to come to terms of understanding what speculative means. Again, with book club now that we're working on the future of Hegel, the word speculative is mentioned a few times, the definition of that. It's different to how Meillassoux defines speculative in terms of speculative realism in Après la finitude. After finitude. It's a complicated word, but I just want to say that it has a difference between philosophy, speculation, and theory. Let's begin, shall we? So part 1, page 108, Lamarck thought that the organ A is used, B is thus improved, and C, the improvement is transmitted to the offspring. This is wrong. We have to think that the organ A undergoes chance variation. So this is how he brings in a bit of Darwin. B, the profitably used ones are accumulated or at least accentuated by selection. C, this continues from generation to generation, the selected mutation constituting a lasting improvement. It is active passive. It's kind of like chance, and it's also active as in you have to keep using this. So this is what I pulled out from what he quotes Huxley to be called the organic selection, which paves the way for true mutation to be immediately seized upon when they happen to turn up in the desirable direction. What does it mean, desirable direction? We will see as we go further along. Continuing on, page 110, feigned Lamarckism. We must try to understand in a general way and to formulate in a non-animistic fashion. Animistic, it means a superpower that organizes and decides and animates material existence or the material universe. How a chance mutation, which gives the individual a certain advantage and favors its survival in a given environment, should tend to do more than that, namely to increase the opportunities for its being profitably made use of so as to concentrate on itself, as it were, the selective influence of the environment. So what we're going to see next is the environment, but I just want to give an overall picture of how it is that, yes, we have to have at our disposition all these chance mutations. And if you go back to my first video, it talks about how it is that a recessive gene becomes a dominant gene, and a dominant gene in terms of one that actually manifests in reality as a phenotype, as opposed to just remaining as a genotype. Again, just watch the first video. But it's the idea of how it is that something from the external world influences how it is that we choose to select among our behaviors that brings out, that manifests something. That is just the link and parallels that I would draw for you, but you can watch the video and connect the dots. So, environment. To reveal this mechanism, let the environment be schematically described as an ensemble of favorable and unfavorable circumstances. For brevity, we shall refer to the first kind as needs and the second as foes. So needs being food, shelter, sunlight, drink, etc. And then foe being dangers from other living beings, so your enemies, poison, or roughness of the element, like too hot, too cold. Not every need can be obtained, not every foe avoided. But a living species must have acquired a behavior that strikes a compromise. So this is like super interesting because compromise takes into account determinations that you cannot choose outside of, and maybe it goes against, like, you know, your true desires, but you make a compromise because that's what's available to you. And this is how you can still make a choice within your determinations, like a full choice within your determinations, a full choice of compromise. In avoiding the deadliest foes and satisfying the most urgent needs from the sources of easiest access so that it does survive. Because in the end, the choices within your determinations is what you believe is the best choice for you to survive. You may not have been given the ideal circumstances, but within the circumstances you were given, you make the best, most optimal choice for your survival. A favorable mutation makes certain sources more easily accessible, or reduces the danger from certain foes, or both. It thereby increases the chance of survival of the individuals endowed with it, but in addition, it shifts the most favorable compromise, because it changes the relative weights of those needs or foes for which it bears. Individuals which by chance or intelligence change their behavior accordingly will be favored and thus selected. So I just want to add this tangent because German and Italian are two languages that I'm still working on. If you want to watch like my video on how that was a 3-month dream, but now I'm just, you know, doing it day by day. But I watched this German series recently, and it was interesting because there was this woman who was talking about her husband, and she was like reminiscing to the time of like, when did it shift from ich will, like I will, to warum nicht? And I don't know, like, as a person who has done acting, watch my video on Hegel to Hollywood, I've always, like, from script analysis realized, or have come to realize, that we act much less based on what we want, but much more about what we want to avoid or the obstacles in our place. So like, let's just say like a person would like to do this, but they don't want to upset their family, or like a person wants to do this, but like they're afraid, like, you know, it's not so much about what they want to do, but all these things that are in their way. Maybe ask yourself, like, the next time you're given a choice in front of you, do you have a warum nicht attitude, which is why not, as in like why, and then potentially all these obstacles that could sway your decision to not actually do something, or ich will, which is a person who just really does not prioritize obstacles as being a part of what it is that makes them want to do something. I don't want to over anticipate something that he says further on, but I think, you know, there's something really to be highlighted about the idea of compromise, and with this mix between what is a need and what is a foe, what is dream and what is reality, and how it is that we still have a very, very active role in how it is that we evolve as a person. So continuing on page 111, the total pattern of foes and needs is intricately interwoven. Thus, a slight reduction of a certain danger by a given mutation may be a considerable difference for those mutants carrying the favorable mutation, think of X-Men, who brave that danger and thereby avoid others. What is to highlight here is that depending on your characteristics and your features, like whatever you're given, the idea is that that totally shifts between like how easy it is to get a need or how less accessible certain needs are, or also like how capable of you are to actually brave your foes. There's this thing that I didn't include because it wasn't super integral, but it was the idea that like at some point, you know, if your needs is just to be safe and not to have confrontations with, let's just say like a bully, right? If at some point the situation becomes so much so that confronting the bully or the foe becomes a need, you can kind of like see how that shifts like your comportmental behavior. Based on all these circumstances and based on, what you have at your disposition, you kind of would prioritize different elements from the environment differently. When you adapt to the environment, you will no longer categorize a bully as a foe, but you would categorize confronting this foe, this enemy, as a need. And oh my god, this is like I'm plugging like every video that I've made. But if you have a interest in this idea of adaptation and survival in society, I have a video called Psychiatry, Is It a Science That Dehumanizes, that talks about that. I don't know why I'm embarrassed. I'm really proud of that dissertation. And this is what I'm here for, to share stuff. Let us continue on. This may result in a noticeable selection not only of the genetic feature in question, but also with regard to the intended or haphazard skill in using it. That kind of behavior is transmitted to the offspring by example, by learning, in a generalized sense of the word. So how are we beginning to see transmission? We are seeing it by learning, like parents who lead by examples, mentors that you have around you, friends that you have around you, and now you can start looking through your contacts and really decide how it is that you want to evolve your life. This is becoming like a self-help video. The shift of behavior in turn enhances the selective value of any further mutation in the same direction. Self-explanatory. So page 112 to 133, genetic fixation of habits and skills. According to our assumptions, the behavior changes parallel those of the physique. First, as a consequence of a chance change in the latter, but very soon directing the further selection mechanism into definitive channels, because according as behavior has availed itself of the first rudimentary benefits, only further mutation in the same direction have any selective value. So there's so many things to bring up, but one of it is genotype and phenotype. It's like you just have to have it at your disposition. You don't have to actually like have it like manifest. And please do not bring in en puissance and en acte. It's not the time. We already have too much on the table. But it's the idea that like you have to have like these capacities within your disposition so that you can use it. And then we can talk about Aristotle at some point. But again, not today, but I'm just gonna continue instead of over-explaining something that he's already written very well. But as, let me say, the new organ develops, behavior becomes more and more bound up with its mere possession. Behavior and physique merge into one. Watch like any of the videos that I made on Bourdieu about hexis. I'll link it. I think it's called like the politeness is oppression. And in the last video I talked about Bourdieu. So behavior and physique merge into one. You cannot possess clever hands without using them for obtaining your aims. They would be in your way, as they often are to an amateur on the stage because he has only fictitious aims. The analogy and the roasting of the actor is amazing and it's great. So you know how they say about method acting? How it is that like, to get into the role, they do this task over and over again so that they can really embody the character. But this is in much more simplified terms. If you were a doctor and you work in the ER and you watch someone on Grey's Anatomy and you just look at the way that they do things, when they don't actually have the real goal of like saving a life, it looks very different to how a doctor would move in real life to see how they save a life. Because one thing that I've learned from a documentary, essentially like sometimes when they give CPR, they're actually supposed to break ribs because the idea is that you want to shock the heart into pumping again. But then with Grey's Anatomy, like if it's actually like a person who's like paid to just lie down and pretend to be dead, you're not going to exert that amount of force because your aims are fictitious. So in the same way, it's kind of like you can't actually have a hand that is able to do like surgical sewing to sew back like a heart if you've never actually had those hands to do that. So you wouldn't have clever surgical hands because you've never had the aims of actually sewing up a heart. And if you actually had clever surgical hands, but you actually had aims to actually be a builder, those very accurate, fine movements will get in the way of your aims and your goals of being like forceful and strong to construct things. So we have now arrived at my favorite phrase of this entire book, which is, you cannot have efficient wings without attempting to fly. I just want to take a moment. This is just a level of poetic that I aspire to be, but only because it's within context, right? As in, I may be giving this dude like too much credit, but I was like moved because we're talking about behaviorism, we're talking about, you know, the theory of evolution, the speculation of evolution. And at what point would a human think about having efficient wings and just like a call to just attempt to fly? It was so out of place, but perfectly placed. So, yeah, I thought I would share that. But let us continue. We must, of course, not think that behavior, after all, gradually intrudes into the chromosome structure or whatnot. So let's not swing all the way back to Lamarck and acquires loci there. It is the new organ themselves, and they do become genetically fixed, that carry along with them the habit and the way of using them. If you're interested in locus, again, the first video that I make talks about and shows you Schrödinger's stance on this. Selection would be powerless in producing a new organ if selection were not aided all along by the organism making appropriate use of it. And appropriate use of it has to do with the environment. It's not just, I'm just going to choose this, because there has to be appropriateness to something external. And this is very essential. For thus, the two things go quite parallel, and one ultimately, or indeed at every stage, fixed genetically as one thing, a used organ, as if Lamarck were right. Again, if you watch my first video, it's very important to really pay attention to the nuances and the stages and where it is that you agree with something and where it is that you don't agree with something, because that changes your whole approach to the overall idea. So the last thing to add here is how it is that it's not just using the organ in general, but something else. So page 114. The true parallel of the evolutionary development of organisms could be illustrated, for example, by a historical exhibition of bicycles, showing how this machine gradually changed from year to year, from decade to decade, or in the same way of railway engines, motor cars, aeroplanes, typewriters, etc. Here, just as in the natural process, it is obviously essential that the machine in question should be continually used and improved, not literally improved by use, but by experience gained and the alterations suggested. Suggested by what? Suggested by your choices that are aligned with your survival based on the environment. So how we talked about the selective influence of the environment. The bicycle, by the way, illustrates the case mentioned before of an organism which has reached the attainable perfection and has therefore pretty well ceased to undergo further changes. Still, it is not about to become extinct. So what is really, really interesting here is not about, like, you know, an evolution that continuously happened just because time passes. Just because you have to keep using your arm over and over again doesn't mean that we, suddenly develop wings. I mean, one can dream. But the point here is that, like, it has to be about us and our environment. And if I can go on another tangent, I think, like, if anything, you cannot choose how society runs. You cannot choose so many different things. But within your power of how it is that you choose to envelop yourself or to create your environment, the group of friends that you have, the country that you choose to live in, because, you know, my biggest thing is that in the environments that I was in before I arrived in France, there was absolutely no demands of me to make, you know, this life that I have now, which consists of reading and explaining and, like, you know, constantly discovering new things. And now, you know, with YouTube, and thank you again, if I haven't thanked you in a long time, for your attention and interest in things that I have to say. So with this in mind, like, you know, I try to consciously put myself with people, in places, and with work that continuously asks for me to continuously adapt and alter, you know, the use of, like, you know, my hand, my eyes, my brain, my ears, in the way that develops and evolves it. But also, like, in saying that, there is a cap to it. There is a cap to it if you remain in one place, you remain with a certain group of friends. So it's not only about placing yourself in the right environment, but I think there is also a call with variety of your environment so that you can continuously adapt and not just adapt yourself within one certain context. So if you haven't watched my video about the algorithm, and here's another plug, but I think it's helpful, of, like, you know, my call and suggestions on how it is that we can break our boring and re-engage with, you know, a different kind of discovery of life, besides getting into life in and of itself. I recommend that series. With my work, I really try to highlight what it is that we're responsible for and what actions we can take, and understanding the limits of our actions. So yeah, with that in mind, I hope you found this helpful, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Wait, I forgot. There's one more thing I would add, because this video is already a bit long, and this thing that I want to add is not a very like the tangent's like not one for one, but I think it's very good. I'm also currently reading Das Kapital from Marx, the first book, and I don't know where I'm at because apparently you're not supposed to reach section 1 until the very end. But yeah, if you're interested, I will be creating a short video and a commentary of a little text of Marx, which has a bit to do with the thing that we just spoke of, which is natural selection. And I'll also be reading a little bit from my book that shows how I'm an ethnographer, which is something that Liz said that I am. I'm sorry for such a rambling ending, but if you're still here, I know you're with this. So besides this little commentary, I thought I would add like the very first page of this very first book that I wrote, on how it is that I kind of really have seen in my own way, or have my agreements with this idea of organic selection. So yeah, if you're interested, it's going to be in my members only videos section. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. I'll talk to you soon.